Perfect. We will get started. Rachel,
So I'm
thank
going
you.
to take off the blur so that this doesn't look weird. Here we go. Sweet.
Amazing.
Like now
you
we
don't need
match.
blur, Rachel. Look how good that background is.
Usually I have like a pile of dirty clothes that I need to fold into that. So
I'm guilty as charged with that as well. Awesome. Well, we'll get started. Rachel, thank you so much for jumping on the WeHero Learn series. So excited to hang out with you for a few minutes. And the goal of having you on, and for folks that don't know Rachel, Rachel is the founder and CEO, right? Rachel, of Millie. Perfect. And so we have a lot of folks that ask us about different CSR platforms that are in existence, what the differences are, what they should be considering when it comes to selecting a CSR platform. And Millie is one of those platforms that we've come across time and time again. And Rachel, you and I have spoken before, and we just felt it was right to have you share a little bit about what Millie is and why you all are so special. And then, of course, share some trends in regards to what we're noticing in the world of volunteering and corporate giving right now. So maybe, Rachel, if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about that story of getting Millie started, because I think that's really special in and of itself. We'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I love it. Ben, thank you so much for having me. It's been so fun getting to know you. We've nerded out on bootstrapped businesses and just volunteering and the space in general. So I'm excited that we get to have a live chat and you can put me in the hot seat and ask me all the tough questions. Millie is a social impact software. We started about 3.5 years ago, originally focused on individual giving and democratizing donor advised funds, making giving accounts kind of accessible to all. And very gratefully, early on in the 6 months into our beta, I'm so grateful to them. A few Boston companies came to us and asked us to build out this, something for employees. And I was like, oh, isn't there software for that? And they're like, not for our size business. We're 500 people or we're 1,000 people. Like, we don't really qualify for some of the bigger platforms. And so we were like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And so that's really where Millie ended up, making this really early major pivot. And since then, we've really been focused on corporate giving and helping companies, specifically kind of mid-market, medium-sized businesses, some SMBs as well, some small businesses as well, start and grow impact programs, that don't have a huge CSR team, that don't have 15 people. We're really focused on those companies that don't have a lot of resources to dedicate to this, but they want to start a giving program, they want to start a volunteering program. So we do, all the usuals like match and volunteer stuff and all the fun stuff. But we also have some really fun, different tools on our platform that are really exciting. We have Giving Madness, which we can dive into, which is like a gamified giving tool, like March Madness brackets, democratizing grant making, where you're putting money in and your employees are voting nonprofits through a bracket. Super fun, really timely right now, as it's March and companies are running them as we speak. And then we also do really cool integrations that, are very on the cutting edge. We were like, the first to do the Slack integration, and we're about to roll out a Teams integration, and really thinking through, where are your employees and how can we pull all the things that you're working on into that. We have a lot of gifting tools that are really popular. So a lot of our customers do gifting through us, where they gift charitable dollars to, whoever, customers, employees. That's who we are. We are, a bootstrap team. So we're very different in our space. We're going up against some really big, amazing players who have really transformed the space and created it. But we definitely are hyper focused on some of those, mid-market companies that might not have a huge team to run one of those really large platforms.
What I love about Millie is that it seemed like previously CSR and software like yours was reserved for the large companies, the Fortune 500, 1,000, that could afford to have a program like this, and that we're actually focusing on building teams out, investing in software to be able to do some of these things. And what's so exciting to me right now is that you see a lot of small, medium-sized businesses raising their hand going, we want to do this as well. We want to prioritize this. Our employees are asking for this, and having a solution like Millie actually makes that really feasible, which I think is really exciting in how this industry is expanding right now. I'd love to get your thoughts, Rachel, just on for companies that are either a medium-sized business, maybe a small business, as they're thinking about starting a social impact program or thinking about, launching a software. What are some of the things that they should consider? What are some of the common challenges that they face? Would love to just get your sense on, for folks that are looking to do this, the things that they should be thinking about right now.
Yeah, really lean into what you as a company want to be doing, right? If you really want to be focused on volunteering, then make sure to dive into the details of the platforms around volunteering. If you're really focused on giving, if you're really focused on engagement, like what are those things that you really want to get out of this platform? And make sure that you, in going into these conversations, cater it towards that, right? Because these platforms have a lot of different areas of things. So if you, for example, we say this a lot, if you have, a large foundation where you're doing running a large grant making process where folks are submitting, you're getting hundreds of applications, we, in the first interview, will say, we're not a good fit for you, right? Like, that's not our skill set. We're really focused on impact around your employees. And so for us, when it's just direct external stuff, like we send all the time, we send to our competitors who are better at that. And so I think it's really important to go into these conversations knowing that each of the softwares out there have pros and cons, right? They're good at certain things and they have focuses, and we're all making decisions as we build things. And, we have to give up certain things to build other things. And, in prioritizing these pieces on what you see, then we're taking out those pieces. And so really just thinking through like, what's the important thing for your team? What are those tools that you think are really important to the program that you're running? And so I think it really depends on what you want to accomplish out of it. Like, what are your goals? Ask a lot of questions. We always say, do a lot of demos. Like when someone comes to us and we're the only demo, we tell them, go look at other software. Like, we want you to come to us after having seen everything else and like feel like, oh, wow. Because we don't want you, a bunch of months in hearing about another software and like, oh, I should have looked into this more. So, and I guess we're a little confident or we just want people to feel really happy about their decision. And so what we found, which is super counterintuitive, is to encourage our prospects to go looking at a few other softwares. So I definitely encourage folks, do a bunch of different demos, see the big players, see the small ones, see, the one, so you'll start to get a better sense of what you're looking for. Because again, this kind of software, it's not like impossible to pull out, but again, you're implementing it across all your employees. You don't want to roll something out and then a year later be like, oh yeah, we're moving to a different one. And so I think, making sure that you're making the right decision is important up front. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I would say to someone as they're evaluating.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the goal setting piece. I think there's so many companies that go like, oh, this is something we can do. Let's check the box, get a software, and then call it good. But they haven't set any of the goals around like what they want their social impact program to accomplish. And you're spot on in the sense of like, there's different software that will help you reach those goals depending on what those goals are. And so I always tell, I always have the saying, slow down to speed up. Like, think about what the goals are for your company, for your employees, for your social impact program broadly, and then back into that with the right technology, with the right programs to be able to actually reach those goals and those targets. You touched on something, Rachel, I want to double back on around the engagement piece. And you touched on Slack integration and gamification. And I want to talk about that because I think a lot of companies, they really struggle with employee engagement, but they also struggle in regards to onboarding employees to actually use a CSR platform. I hear time and time again about, oh, we only have, 40, 50% in some cases of our employee base using our CSR platform. That means like they're missing out on matching gifts, missing out on volunteer opportunities. And I think it's interesting how you are playing with gamification here, as well as like actually integrating Millie into the existing workflow for employees like Slack. Yep. And I think that those are lessons on A, what Millie's capable of, but two, what, folks that are in a role of CSR, they should think about in regards to how to engage their employees. So can you talk a little bit about those two things for Millie?
Absolutely. Yeah. So from the beginning, I remember I was doing a bunch of research when we were first deciding to like go into this space of corporate impact and, should we pivot from individual to company? And in doing the research, I came across the average participation rate in these programs, which was 11%. And I was shocked. That was participation in any sort of giving capacity with like at least $1, right? Not even like the utilization of the match, but just the anyone just that participated in at least $1. And I could not believe it, right? We always talk about all this money that's being left on the table. There's just so much, like it is, in my opinion, a stain on our industry that we haven't figured out this engagement piece, right? We're out there helping companies check those boxes of features, but we're not thinking about what is the goal of this program, right? Why are you implementing this? Wow, well, you're implementing this to actually have an impact on the community, right? You want some volume going through the system. And you're also doing this so that you can create that bond with your employees, right? Create that connection amongst them and with their employer. And so if utilization is super low, if this participation rate's low, you're only really doing it with such a small group of people. And so that 11% number really became a target for me to shift on our platform. And so we knew, like, of course we would make it super user friendly and make a really fun database with badges that you can filter and profiles that nonprofits can drag drop things. And it's a really exciting, beautiful experience. But I knew, like, we knew from the beginning that wasn't going to be enough, right? Like making it a beautiful, usable interface. Yeah, it'll move the needle a little bit, but like, how do we really move that needle? Like, how do we make that 11% double or triple, right? Like, or beyond, right? How do we, so that was really important to me. And so we started with Slack, right? The first question I had was, where are people? Like, where are our customers? Where are their employees that aren't engaging in these tools and these programs? And so that's why we built out the Slack app. That's why we're building out a replica app on Teams, because that's where their employees are, right? Like, I think a big miss for a lot of the platforms in the space was they really tried to make the platform the destination. That's not what the platform should be, right? Like, the platform is not a destination. No one's buying these platforms to make, like, they tried to make them into like social networks is really what a lot of them do with comments and this and that. And that's what they built. They built tons of features to make it into this social network. And one of the things that you'll learn about a social network that we've learned as this millennial generation, as we've grown up with the various social networks that have grown up with us, is that a social network is only good as the people on it, right? Like, if you don't have people coming to that network and commenting and doing all those things. And so I knew if we would try to replicate what they had, we were going to get that same miss, right? We weren't going to move that needle. Where are people? Where are they socializing? Where are they having these interactions? And so it just kept coming back to Slack and Teams. And it was like, why is everyone trying to create these social networks around impact, right? They already have a place where they're social. That's where their company has already established all their communication lives. To try and replicate that with an impact twist just felt a little off, especially for me as a product designer, my background, right? I always, as a product designer, like, you design all these pretty mock-ups, but you also I always try to design a mock-up version of what it's actually going to look like, even when it's underutilized. And so I think that's what's really important, because you can build these platforms, and if no one's using them in the way you intend, then it looks bare, right? It looks sad. And so I think for us, it was really about, how do we get this engagement rate to be higher? We don't want to pull people onto Millie. Like, we don't need us to be the focus, right? The employees are the focus. And so pulling in what the program admins are building onto Slack was really much more important. So now the Slack integration is crazy. I mean, it's like the coolest features. I cannot take any credit. Our engineering team did an amazing job building it out. It's so extensive. You can build out channels for different volunteer events. You can connect different channels to campaigns that you have running. It's super cool. And then you can search anywhere in Slack for groups, volunteer events, like directly in your typing bar anywhere. It's really cool. Like, everything that you're doing on it gets pulled into Slack natively. So it ended up being like, we didn't know when we were building it that, oh, this was for sure gonna like change the game. Obviously now after it's been live, we can see it because our customers tell us how much it's changed their engagement. So yeah, it's been wild to watch.
That's so cool. And I think you're so spot on that nobody wants another app. I feel like I always hear that. Yeah. And I always say that nobody wants another app. So try to figure out a way to work into somebody else's workflow. It's going to make your life so much easier. Talk to me for just a little bit about the gamification piece. Like you're doing the March Madness piece right now. I want to hear about that because hoping it sparks some ideas for other folks in regards to how they can get increased engagement as well through something like gamification.
Cool. Yeah. So that actually started from like the craziest story a bunch of years ago. So when Millie first started 3 years ago, I was a few months into this. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a product. It was like me solo in the wilderness. And I, early days for anyone who's a founder, like begging everyone to have a coffee with you. You're just like, give me a half an hour, give me 15 minutes. Like, I just want to pick your brain. So that was me in the early days. I'm just like coffee. Even though I drink tea. So I just had to fake it till I made it, which I still haven't, but and I grabbed coffee with this guy, Tim Smith, who used to work at the Boston Foundation, who now works at Pledge 1% and Tides jointly. Incredible, like philanthropy genius. He was so gracious. He gave me I think we went on a few coffee runs together and we chatted once in the month of March. So it was actually probably 3 years ago, this month. And it was during March Madness. And we're talking about how do we get philanthropy? We're just thinking big picture. Like, how do we change philanthropy? Like, what do we do here? And now looking back, I'm like, why was he giving me the time of day as we had these conversations? And he said, I remember him saying something like, Rachel, I'm obsessed with March Madness. Like, someone needs to do something around giving and March Madness. Like, there's got to be something there. And I was like, that's brilliant. I am going to do that. I think he thought I was joking. I think now looking back, I remember I emailed him a few months ago and I was like, FYI, it's built and here it is. And you could not believe that it came to fruition. But yeah, so he suggested this idea and it kind of stuck in my brain. I've always been obsessed with basketball and competition. And I just always thought this was really fun. I was ran a sports camp when I was a kid for a lot of years. So my family makes fun of me that it just always comes back to brackets for me. It just has to tie back in. And so I think from that experience, it really just, I knew that there was something there. Whatever Tim said, I was it resonated right then. And I think this is going to be big. And as the idea evolved, it became more and more apparent that we had to build it because there was such a large funding gap to nonprofits between January 1 and I would say usually mid-November. There is a little bit of a spike of foundation money that comes in at the end of June, but really for the most part, most giving happens in the last 6 weeks of the year.
Yep.
And so, nonprofits, are throwing these Hail Marys, hoping that something lands. And it's really painful, right? A lot of nonprofit layoffs happen in the beginning of the year because of it. And so what we really were trying to do once we kind of realized this was wait a second, March, this is perfect. There's this gap in giving right in March. This is the middle of the gap. And what if we could really build momentum around this? And then the other big factor was, okay, we have Giving Tuesday, huge success, started a decade ago out of the 92nd Street Y, really as this idea around giving and time, which was another reason why I loved this, Giving Madness concept, because it was so time focused and we knew time-based events work. It's why volunteering is so successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Giving campaigns are so successful. You got to put a time around something because it will get people much more excited and energized, and it will move people to act. So we knew that Giving Tuesday was super successful, but it was focused on individuals, right? There was no moment in the year where we, as a society, were saying, hey, corporations, what are you doing? How are you giving back? It would happen every so often when something bad would happen in the world, but it was never this annual moment where there was a little bit of pressure, right? Like on Giving Tuesday, we as individuals feel that pressure to give. That doesn't really exist for companies. And so we really wanted to try to create that around March, because we thought, oh, this is so great. Most March Madness basketball brackets are filled out in the workplace, right? Workplace brackets. Workplace is the most common place that people fill out brackets, not with family or friends, but at work. And so it's already this familiar thing at work. 70 million brackets are filled out every year. I mean, that's crazy. That's a crazy number, especially because most people don't watch college basketball compared to that 70 million, right? Like a fraction. And so I think that was really powerful, like seeing those numbers, seeing it was such a workplace thing. Everything just kind of felt like, wow, let's create this moment around giving. So it's been amazing. So we just, this month, every day, we're just more and more companies are launching these brackets, giving away. I would say on average, the brackets have been somewhere around 20K each, some much larger, some smaller, depending on the size of the business. But for the most part, we've just seen unbelievable giving happen through these brackets. And it's a lot of fun. The companies put 16 nonprofits into the bracket. All the nonprofits end up winning something, but they put 16 nonprofits in, put this large pool of money towards it, and then their employees vote the nonprofits through the bracket over the course of a 1 week period or a 1 month period. So it's been a lot of fun, totally wild. Definitely not, now that it's like live and happening, it's exciting to see so much money flow to charity from this weird wacky concept that came from a coffee/tea chat. So yeah, but it's been fun. And honestly, gamification has hugely helped engagement numbers. So we're going to be putting out a whole case study about this in probably end of April on how these first brackets did, what worked, what didn't, what really drove engagement, what were those engagement rates, what did they look like. Right now, just from these first brackets that have finished, like engagement's amazing, so much higher than what engagement normally is in these programs. And so it's really cool to see like net new people that weren't doing volunteering, weren't necessarily doing their own giving, but wanted to vote in a bracket to help the company choose where to give the money. And so it's been super cool to watch.
It's so awesome. I think it's such a brilliant idea. And again, to the point of just like, this is one example of gamification, like really working, but there's so many other ways companies can take advantage of that gamification to really engage their staff, create something new and exciting. I mean, employees are so used to the same calls of actions to donate now, volunteer now, like having something that's new and exciting as an experience for folks to go in and participate in, I think is such a great way forward for so many companies. I hope more companies start adopting ideas like this. And I hope we keep hearing ideas of how companies are implementing some form of gamification. Maybe it's not March Madness, maybe it's something else, but I'm glad, hopefully under the March Madness bracket, you have, credit to Tim for
yeah, he's all over our site. I like sent it to him before it was live. I'm like, I hope it's okay. I'm blasting your name everywhere.
Oh my gosh. With the few minutes we have left, Rachel, a few kind of industry broad questions. I'm really curious, what are you noticing right now at being some of the largest challenges that CSR professionals are dealing with? Would love to get your take on what they're struggling with right now.
Yeah, I think in general, what we're seeing is a capacity problem. So our, core demographic of companies is this like mid-size company, right? A few hundred employees to like 5,000 or 6,000 employees. That's most of our customers. And so most of those companies don't have teams. It's usually a one-person show, maybe two, who are running impact. And oftentimes it's like an HR person or an engineering manager that wears this as like an additional hat. And I think that's a really hard thing. I think we're starting to now see a much greater movement towards turning these into full-time jobs, especially in this mid-sized market. And I think that's really what we're seeing as a challenge, right? It's convincing the C-suite that this is an important role to have, because it's really hard to run this program, even if you're a full-time person doing it by yourself, let alone if you have another day job and you're just doing this on the side, and you're expected to have high engagement rates and know how to, respond to tragedy really quickly. And there's just a lot that I think for the last 5 to 10 years, companies just coasted, letting the most eager employee take this on, pro bono / moonlighting and just doing it. But that's not going to be able to last forever, especially as more employees are demanding these kinds of programs and we're seeing them work. And so I think the big thing is going to be around how do we convince, and this is part of my job, is like, how do we convince the C-suite that this is important, right? How do we convince the CEO that this is important? Because I think ultimately there's so much interest from the team. It's really just making sure that there's someone to take it on that isn't burdened with another full-time job. So yeah, that's I think the big thing that I'm hoping that we can fix over the next bunch of years.
Yeah, I second that. I spoke to a woman the other day. She's the single CSR leader for an 11,000 person company. Like the amount of work that's on her shoulders is so challenging. And I agree with you. It's so important that the C-suite starts recognizing how important this function is. One of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on is we focus on a lot of strategy work. And so we're really trying to tie investment into these CSR programs and how that relates to revenue growth, cost savings, employee engagement broadly. And I think the more we can do that, and the more we have platforms like Millie providing data showing that hey, this is actually really working, the better. I think, some companies, they think of this as the first step. It's getting that check the box, oh, we need CSR, we need ESG. Let's hire a person, put them in that role, and they'll take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. And that's so challenging right now. So I definitely second that. That's being a really big challenge right now in our space.
Yeah. What do you think are the biggest challenges?
That's one of the big ones, capacity. Yeah. I think to the point we were talking around gamification, I think companies right now are really struggling with engagement. Yes. Whether that's engagement with giving, engagement with volunteering, it's really challenging. And especially what's making that increasingly more challenging is hybrid, remote, in office, and the decisions that have to be made there. And so companies are really trying to find an identity of what their culture is going to be and what their work life is going to be right now. And I think that's impacting a lot of those engagement pieces for their staff. And with a high focus on retention right now, there's a lot of pressure on this. And so I think I'm seeing all those things as pain points right now as companies really try to increase engagement, focus on CSR and ESG, and do that in a really efficient manner amidst everything else they have going on right now in the macroeconomic world.
Wild times.
It's wild. Rachel, my last question that's top of mind for you is that what's exciting you the most right now in our industry? When you look broadly across, all the CSR players, ESG players, the technology that's coming out, different vendors, what is really exciting you right now in our space?
Yeah. So what I'm excited about is when I take a step back and think about where the space has come from and where it's going. Right now, we as an industry, match programs, impact programs, volunteering, anything around that. We maybe, I don't know the exact statistic, but I'm guessing we maybe have touched 1% of companies, maybe. That is the most exciting thing for me because I truly believe that is shifting like crazy, right? I think when we look at this space in 10 years, it's going to be expected that someone has a match program or a volunteer program or something impact oriented. It's going to be, we already see the young people are asking these questions. They're asking when they're interviewing, what are you doing? That's why a lot of people come to us, right? It's come from, potential hires. It's come from their employees. And so I do think that there's this tipping point that's happening now where companies of all sizes are feeling this pressure. It used to just be that if you're a Fortune 500 company, it's a checkbox that you got to check off. You got to have your match program, just like everybody else in your industry. But 5 years ago, were small businesses having these programs? No, they would never even think of it. And so I think that's changed a lot over these last few years. And I think moving forward, it's only going to change more and more. So I'm most excited because I think there's so much more impact to be made, right? We've barely touched the surface on this. And I know that we're going to see so many companies of all sizes start these programs. And so I think it's just very exciting to me to think about that. Like, wow, we can help enable these companies start to think about what should they be doing? How should they convince their CEO this is important? Like, we're really helping them lay the groundwork at their company, whether they're 50 people or 5,000, right? And just, it's very exciting to me because I just think there's so much opportunity, right? We're not building, I don't know, what's like a generic software, but like, we're not building like a to-do list or a management, whatever software that's like, it's saturated. The market's done,
filter.
you know, what?
A face filter.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. There's enough of those out there, right? Or everyone uses, you know, whatever. Yeah. It's these industries, you know, software has saturated so many industries. And I think this is one of those spaces where it barely. And I think this is where software, I think, can help these companies adopt these kinds of programs. Whereas imagine you're a 200-person company and you're trying to run a match program and you're running campaigns and you're asking your accounting department to do all these charges and you're managing it in a spreadsheet and a form and this and I mean, it's like a nightmare. That's what most people do before they bring on software and realize like, wait, actually I can make this super easy. So yeah, I think I'm very excited about that. I just think I think there's just going to be, I think corporate giving in general right now is a small portion of giving. And I think it's going to end up being a large portion of giving if we do this right over the next few decades.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I was so excited. I was working with a company, 10 employees, so small. And at that stage, they were already thinking about their social impact strategy. Love and it. Like, that's like, I was so excited by that like this company at this stage is already thinking like that. And I think to your point, we're seeing more and more companies do that. And going back to the challenge you and I talked about, just a capacity issue. It's a challenge to see that capacity issue, but I also see it as a strong signal. I meet with a lot of CSR professionals. Like, I am the very first CSR professional at this large company. And this is how they wanted to get started. And, you know, that's painful for that individual, but I think it's a strong signal that like companies are trying this on for the first time in many cases. And I think that gets me really excited because the demand is definitely there.
Yep. I'm excited. It's fun.
Rachel, where can people learn more about you? Where can people learn more about Millie? How can they find out about all that?
Sure. Yeah. You can check us out on milligiving.com. We got a lot of cool things rolling out in the next bunch of months. If you want to hear more about Giving Madness, you can go to givingmadness.com to hear more about and see that, start a bracket. Totally free for companies that are under 25 employees. So we highly encourage folks. That is thanks to a very generous grant from the Gates team. So huge shout out to them. And yeah, really excited to kind of see where this goes. And if anyone is a nerd like me in social impact, I always love chatting. So you know, my email's open, rachel@milligiving.com. And yeah, Ben, thank you so much for having me. Like, this is so fun. I feel like we always end up having fun, whether it's recorded or not. So yeah, hugely grateful to you for bringing me on and letting me tell the Millie story.
It's so fun. I feel like our stories are so similar, especially in this industry. So I love chatting with you. For folks that do reach out to Rachel to meet up, take her for a tea. Don't go out and get coffee. She's already told you she's not a coffee drinker. So actually go to a tea bar, something like that. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Ben.